Pajamas poppin' YouTube. So for those of you who have watched this channel for a while, you'll know that I am a fan of Neil Gaiman, and so I read what many consider to be his best book, with The Ocean at the End of the Lane. So this book is pretty short and sweet, so we'll just get into it. So the story opens on our narrator, this unnamed British man that definitely is not a self-insert for Neil Gaiman. He has just left the funeral of an unspecified family member of his to come down to his old childhood home, which has since been demolished. However, he remembers this other farmhouse at the end of the lane that he used to go and play at when he was a kid, and goes down there. So the other farmhouse is called the Hempstock Farm, and it's still there, complete with this little pond that Letty Hempstock, a girl the narrator knew when he was a boy, used to say was an ocean. Anyway, so Mr. Narrator Man starts, staring at the ocean and begins to remember some events from his childhood. So he used to live just up the road, as we established, with his mum, dad, and his sister. They then fell on hard times, and so had to start, renting out his bedroom to a lodger. One of these lodgers is this South African miner who runs over the narrator's cat and kills it the first day he shows up, so, pretty great lodger. However, he buys the kid a new cat, but it's just this, horrible orange one, and it's just not very good. Anyway, so one day the family's car gets stolen and they find it at the end of the lane. Inside it is the miner who has done a cheeky suicide by, doing the whole thread a hose onto your car exhaust and then thread it into the car. And basically he had a bunch of other South Africans' money and he was supposed to invest it for them in England, but he blew it at the casino and killed himself. So because this is quite the traumatic event for the narrator, and because he and his dad were the ones to find the dead guy, he goes and hangs out at the nearby Hempstock farm while his dad, talks to the police. And he meets the Hempstocks. There are three of them: old Mrs. Hempstock, the granny, late 30s Gina Hempstock, and 11-year-old Letty. Basically, they're the Fates, but we'll get there later. Anyway, so he hangs around with them for, a bit, and Letty tells him that the pond in the garden is actually an ocean, and that her mother and her grandmother crossed it a long time ago to get to England. Which sounds like bullshit to, little narrator man. Anyway. So the narrator goes home and has a bad dream where he coughs up a coin, but then he wakes up and it actually happened. So he goes to see Letty, and she realises that some supernatural tomfoolery is afoot, and takes wee little narrator off to the weirdly enchanted farm that the Hempstocks own. She finds the creature responsible, which is called a flea. It's basically a big cloth monster, and because, this is a mischief maker from the world beyond, and because the dead guy was praying for money, she's been giving it to people. However, she's not meant to be here, and so Letty is going to, banish her. However, one important thing is that she told Narrator Man, or Narrator Boy, to not let go of her hand, and he does this for a brief moment, and there is this sharp pain in his foot. It seems that Letty has banished the flea bag, but when the narrator gets home, he pulls this weird worm thing out of his foot. So soon after, his mum and dad hire this new nanny called Ursula Monckton, who moved into his old room. Basically, she's a flea in a human form, and is here to be, evil and cause mischief for the next little bit. So she is pretty mean to the Narrator Boy, and keeps threatening to lock him in the attic. But the sister loves her, though, because she's basically bribing her. So anyway, the boy refuses to eat anything Ursula makes, and it's all very Roald Dahl-ish. But then Ursula Monckton starts, straight up fucking the narrator's dad, and then bewitches the dad to go and drown the narrator in the bathtub. So, normal parenting things. And the dad doesn't quite go through with it, but he almost does. And anyway, so that night, the narrator sneaks out the house, sees, Ursula fucking his dad, which he doesn't quite understand what it is, but anyway, and but he's been forbidden from leaving, and every time he tries to leave, Ursula just sort of teleports in and BTFOs him. But anyway, so he runs off to the Hempstock farm, but Ursula chases after him, and luckily he manages to get onto the property, and so the Hempstocks can sort of ward her away using magic. Ursula then sends the mum and dad round to blow the entire operation, but Grandmother Hempstock does the most tense knitting scene of all time, and basically cuts the threads of fate, which is represented by a coat, and sort of cuts out and then stitches something back on, so the mum and dad forget why they're coming over there, and they think that the narrator's just on a sleepover with Letty, and it's not really explained. So anyway, they now have the issue of this flea. Basically, the flea's door back to her world is in the narrator's foot. That's why she's been so protective of him. So they take it out, and then Letty and Narrator Man go off to, banish Ursula Monckton back to the Phantom Zone. So anyway, Letty and the narrator confront Ursula, but she uses her magic powers to mummify the kid in cloths, and then says how she's going to torture them both for eternity, yada yada yada. But then Letty says, basically like, yo, here's your route home. I've called these nightmare-carrying birds things to come and kill you because you've been misbehaving. So basically these like carrion monsters are the Reapers from Doctor Who. They come to clean up stuff that shouldn't be on planes, and so Ursula like freaks out and tries to get home, but it turns out part of her gateway is in Narrator Boy's heart, and so she needs to kill him in order to leave. But Letty stops her, and then a bunch of demon birds come and just rip her to shreds. So they then realise that part of her is inside Narrator Boy's heart, and so they try to kill him. But Letty sacrifices herself, and they accidentally... Well, they don't kill her exactly. She can't die, but they like grievously damage her. Anyway, old Mrs. Hempstock shows up and goes Super Saiyan on them because it's against their purpose to kill the Hempstock, and so the Shadowbirds just run off. And then the two Hempstocks then sink Letty in the ocean, and she goes off to rejuvenate. Gina Hempstock is a salty sailor about the whole situation, and drops Narrator Boy back off at home, and then spins some bullshit to the mum about like how he was at a going away party for Letty, who has now moved to Australia. Then, weirdly enough, Narrator Boy believes this as well. We then jump back to the present day when Narrator Boy is all grown up and staring at the ocean. Old Mrs. Hempstock and her daughter come to talk to him as he remembers the truth now. However, as time passes, he begins to forget again and believes, in the bullshit about Letty being in Australia. And we learn that he has done this many times over the years. When he is at an important time in his life, he comes back to the Hempstock farm and has this exact conversation and talks to the ocean and the Hempstocks and everything. So, for example, when he was 24 and scared because he had to raise 2 children, when he was in his early 30s and he was leaving he was emigrating, or now, presumably in his late 40s, when someone close to him has died. And we never find out who the funeral was for, and he chooses to leave the Hempstock farm once again and go back to the funeral to see his family. The end. So this book was really good. The prose is beautiful, as per Gaiman's usual, but the story was really captivating. I didn't want to stop reading this one, and its short length made it really a very digestible read. So as far as the core thematic content of the book, it's about childhood. The whole thing reads like a Roald Dahl book, or basically a kid's book for adults, is probably how I describe it. That's kind of how I describe a lot of Gaiman's novels. Like, either they are straight-up kids' books, like Coraline, The Graveyard Book, or they are kids' books for adults, like Neverwhere, or this one. American Gods is sort of a bit of an outlier here, in its own little league, where it's like an actual adult book. But anyway, this book is basically about how when you're a kid, the world is so magical and scary and wonderful and strange and amazing, but as we get older, we replace all these supernatural elements with mundane, boring explanations for what happened. But, when we reach hard moments in our lives, we seek some solace in the memories of our childhood and the fantasy that we used to live in. The real memories, if you will, the magical ones. And it's a really nice little book that very succinctly and easily explains this theme. So as far as other things, the 3 Hempstocks are clearly meant to be the Fates, or the 3 goddesses, the Maiden, the Mother, and the Crone, Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos, whatever you want to call them. I mean, Gaiman features them a lot in his works. They're a major plot point in Sandman, for example, and this is compounded by the whole stitching angle the grandmother has. Pretty obvious. It's kind of interesting when you read Gaiman's books because he has a lot of very obvious allegory or allusions to famous mythological works that are kind of there, but he doesn't bring a lot of attention to them. But he expects his audience to know, or at least a lot of his audience to know, which is why I think in the American Gods TV show something didn't really work for me when they treated the whole Mr. Wednesday as Odin as a plot twist. I'm going off topic here, but whereas in the book it's not treated like a plot twist, it's just kind of like oh yeah, I'm Odin. Because he literally introduces himself as Odin. He might as well have been walking around with a I am Odin sign above his head, but anyway. The last thing I want to talk about is the narrator. And I think this might be, a bit autobiographical in a way. A lot of books are, either consciously or unconsciously, but, Gaiman does it a lot. Dream is clearly meant to look like him, for example, but the narrator is unnamed, which is a big clue. He lives in England, clearly the South, by a lot of the vernacular, and at the end, the whole life events the protagonist talks about eerily mirror Gaiman's own life, if you do a little research into this. So he had kids young, around 24 to 25, for example. He moved to the USA when he was 32, and, this may be out of line for me to speculate, but I think the funeral is for the protagonist's father, and there is a large emphasis on the son's relationship with the father in the book, and the mother is rather sidelined, but also Gaiman's own father died in 2009, and this book was published in 2013, and and it takes a few years for a book's like from a book's inception to it being published. So the timeline kind of tracks. So I don't know how autobiographical this is supposed to be, but it's kind of interesting to talk about. But it is. I do think the dad is the funeral, because the sister's still alive. The mum's not really mentioned, but the dad has a huge emphasis on the story. Anyway, amazing book, probably my favourite I've read this year. 5 out of 5 would highly recommend, although I have spoiled the entire thing. But I don't know, this book's one of the ones where I don't think knowing the plot is that important. Like, I think the plot's pretty simple where it's going. You more read it for the whimsy and the journey it takes you on. And if you want to check out some of my work, check out my Christmas story, More Jesus. It should now be on my website for free, so give it a read if you want to check out some of my writing and get in the mood for the holidays, although it is quite a edgy is the wrong word, just a not pessimistic. I don't know. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.